this is Marion from Wool Thread Paint. Welcome to the start of our video journey together through the 8 sections of the vintage Florals blanket. As I explain in the written pattern, I decided to make the blanket again 3 or 4 years since the first one, partly because some of the original yarns have been discontinued, and partly because I felt the written pattern itself, could do with some improvement. This is the first time I've attempted to make a full step-by-step video guide, and I hope you'll find it useful, especially if you're new to crochet. Inevitably, there are some parts which do repeat the process, particularly the granny stripe sections, but I hope you will appreciate the chance to recap when you come to make each section. And today we're starting with section 1, which is the very centre of the blanket and made up of 9 granny squares joined together. So let's start the journey. So today we're going to be working on the centre squares. I've made 2 of these so far, and from a distance they look like little white flowers with a background. Now I've changed the colours very slightly from the original one, so I'm very happy with this colour, which is by a yarn manufacturer called James C. Brett, and this is their stone washed range, and it's a variegated yarn. It's 100% acrylic, but it actually does feel as if there is some wool in it. It's very similar in feel to the Stylecraft batik yarn, which I also use in the pattern. But this yarn, I'm going to make a feature of this pattern, and I do hope very much that it stays in stock with James C. Brett and want any of the stockists that carry it at the moment. So today I'm going to be working with the Batik Rose, the Stylecraft Cream, the Stylecraft Special Pale Rose, and this James C. Brett Variegated. And I'm working with my 4mm hook, and of course you also want to have a nice sharp pair of scissors and a blunt tapestry needle for sewing in the ends. So I'll put these to one side just now. And let's start. Now I'm going to start, I'll push these out of the way. My table is a little cluttered tonight, and it is evening, so I am working in artificial light, but I hope we manage to get it as bright as possible for you. So I'm going to start with a slip knot on my hook, and then I'm going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm going to slip stitch into the very first chain, and what that does is creates a circle with a hole in the middle. You can just about see that hole in the middle, and that's what we're going to be working into to do the first round of the square. So round 1, we're going to chain 3. Now that chain 3 is the equivalent of 1 treble stitch and 1 chain, and I'm using UK terms for this tutorial, so in US terms, of course, the treble stitch is double crochet. Some people use 3 chains to start when they're using the treble. Personally, I prefer 2, so that's why I've done 2 chains, and then we need to have an extra chain for part of the pattern, so that's 3 chains. Then I'm going to make my first treble by yarning over, finding that middle hole, pushing through my hook, grabbing the yarn, pulling it back through, yarn over, and then you've got 3 loops on your hook, so you want to pull through 2 and then yarn over again and pull through 2, and that is how you make a treble stitch. Then I'm going to chain 1 because we're actually going to be making a circle with spokes like a bicycle wheel, and there's going to be a chain 1 between each spoke. So we've got 2 spokes so far, and we've got 6 more to do. So another treble stitch into the centre, and chain 1, and so on all the way round. Treble, chain 1, treble, chain 1, treble, and chain 1. Now I'll just stop here because I haven't been counting. I'll just check to see how many of these treble spokes I've done. So that's with the first 2 chains counts as the first treble. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 I've done. And I want to do another 2 trebles. So that's 1, chain 1, and a second treble and chain 1. That's me got my 8 spokes ready. So all I need to do is find the top of these, that first chain 2, and put my hook in and make a slip stitch to finish off. And then we're finished with that yarn, so I can put that to one side and finish off. And that's our first round of the square. Now what I'm going to do is turn it over to the other side like that. I'll just pull this tight just now, but we'll stitch them in, stitch all these ends in once we've got the square finished. So that is the wrong side uppermost, and that's how we're going to work it, because I'm going to turn my square each time after each round. So we're going to start round 2. Now round 2 is where we make the creamy coloured petals for the daisy. And I'm off camera here trying to find an end of my yarn, because this is just an odd part of a ball of yarn I've got. Right, so we've got a chain space between each of these spokes. So you want to start by putting your hook into any of these chain spaces and pull up the loop. Now the way I tend to attach my yarn is I then put both of these ends, both of these pieces of yarn over my hook. That's the short end plus the long end, and I pull them both through like that, so that I've got 2 loops on my hook. Then I find the short end and pull it out. Don't ask me why I do that. I've been doing it all the time I've crocheted, and I don't think about it when I'm doing it. This is just the way I attach my yarn. So I've got my cream yarn attached, and I'm going to chain 2. And again, that is the equivalent of the very first treble stitch. And then I'm going to put 2 more trebles, or double crochet in US terms, into that same space, and then I'm going to chain 1. And then all you need to do is work around the circle, going into each space between the spokes with 3 trebles, and a chain 1 between them. We've got all these 2 starting and finishing ends from the previous round, so just push them out of the way, and 3 more trebles, chain 1. So I've got 1 more treble to make of this cluster, and then chain 1. So if you check, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these cream petals, but we've still got 1 space left. So I'm going to put my last cluster of 3 trebles into this space and then chain 1, and then all you need to do again is find the top of your first chain 2, put your hook in and pull through a slip stitch, and that's your second round finished. Cut the yarn again. And of course, time to turn it over. Don't worry about all these ends that we're accumulating. We will sort them out at the end of the square. And this is the pale rose now, which I'm going to work the third round. Now for the third round, obviously we have a nice circle going on at the moment, but what we want to do is we want to square that off with the third round, and to do that we're going to put the hook into any of the spaces between these petal clusters and attach the yarn the way I showed you earlier. Pull out the short end, chain 2, and we're going to start a corner. We're only going to do half of the corner, so we've chained 2 and we're going to put in 2 more trebles into that same space like that. That's half of the corner, so when we've come all the way round we'll finish that corner off before we fasten off the yarn. So there's no chains between the clusters this time. We're just going to move straight over. So we're going to jump over these petals and go straight in to the next space and put in 3 treble stitches. And then again into the next space with 3 treble stitches. But this space also happens to be where we're putting in the next corner. So we've got 3 trebles in it, and we're going to chain 2 to make the corner and then put 3 more trebles into that same space. And you can see how that just takes you around the corner. And then we've got 3 trebles in the next space. And you can see how it's beginning to look a bit more like a square. So 3 trebles in the next space. That's 2, 3. And then we're ready for the third corner. 3 trebles. Chain 2 and 3 trebles. And what we have left is we've got another space to put in 3 trebles and then this half made final beginning and ending corner, if you like. So I'm going to put in my 3 trebles in the next space. The third one, and then all we need to do is finish off the corner. So we want to put in 3 trebles into that corner where there already are 3 trebles, and chain 2, and then look for that the top of your first chain 2 and slip stitch through. And that's the third round finished. You can see how that makes a nice little flower shape sitting there with the cream petals. So we're going to turn it over again. And this time I'm going to be using this really lovely variegated yarn. And if we go back to this one, you can see how pretty it looks making this variegated edge around the square. And as I explain in the pattern, a lot of the influence and inspiration for this blanket came from the idea of an old antique patchwork bedspread or patchwork quilt. And very often, of course, the fabrics were washed out and faded, using scraps from old clothes, dresses and things, and very often floral patterns. So although we're doing this large flower, I just think that this variegated has got the look of a pattern about it, which I like. So again, in the corner, I started my yarn with a slip knot, chain 2, and we're just doing exactly the same as the round 3, in as much as we're going to do half the corner, again still using treble or double crochet in US terms, and 3 trebles, but this time we're a little bit bigger than the previous round. We've grown a little bit, so we've got an extra set of trebles to put in before we come to the next corner. So I am on my 3rd side now. And we're on the final side now. 3 trebles in the next 2 spaces. Three more trebles. And then we're back to where we started with half the corner. So we have to put in 3 trebles into that first corner and 2 chains, and then we can fasten off. Just find that's it. Pull it through the 2 loops, and I'll show you what that looks like. And now you can see how you have the nice cream coloured flower surrounded by the pale rose, and then this very pretty variegated yarn. Of course, I'll be doing the next round in the next part of the video, and you will be turning it to the other side to work the next round. So what you want to do first, I recommend, is to sew in all these ends so that you've got a nice neat square ready for joining. But what you want to do is you've got to think of this side, which has got the wrong side of the last round uppermost, as being the front. So I'm going to just use my hook to pull. There are some of the ends showing on this side, so I'm going to pull everything through to the back just by grabbing the loose end, and I think that's them all through to the back. And then when I turn it over, you can see it's looking a bit straggly, and this is what we're going to do now to finish off. And I always start with the end, well, where we actually started the square. It's this end here, and that's the one I'm going to do first of all. And this is the one you want to pull tightly, because there is a small hole in the centre that we want to close up. So what I do is I just put my needle, not going all the way through, just through one layer of the stitches, and I go round the circumference of that circle, and when I get back to where I started, I pull it really nice and tight, and you see how that closes up. I give it another little chance to go underneath the stitches, and then I go back the other way. a little bit. It doesn't really matter how many times you do it. The more times, the better, in my opinion, because you are sure that you're not going to have that end unravelling. Then pull it up quite firmly and trim it. And that's your very first end sewn in. Now that one we had to pull really tightly to close up that centre hole. The other ones you don't want to pull them tightly because you will be pulling your square out of shape. So this is the other, the end where we finished this first round, and it's not got much to work into because we just had the spokes. But I'm still going to pick up some of those stitches, and I always try to work, if I'm using one colour, I always try to work weaving my ends into the part that's got the same colour, so I wouldn't be putting this underneath the cream petals, for example. I'll give it another one just to be sure, and that's the second of these ends sorted. Now I'm going to work and finish all of these off. So I've got the two whites, the two pale rose, and then when we come to this edge, personally I prefer to just sew in this end and leave this end for the time being. Now why? Because if I was to thread this onto a needle and then weave it in and weave it back, maybe weave it in a third time, this part of your crochet square is going to get a bit confusing. It's going to get a bit tight with all this yarn woven through it. And then when you come to do your next round and you're working in, you might find it a little bit less easy to find where to put your hook. Again, doesn't matter, it's not necessarily something that you have to do, it's just the way I do it. So I'm going to leave this end, as you can see in this one. Oh, no, that one's not been. This one I've just actually haven't finished off one of these ends. I've finished off all the others and I've got this one left. So next time you see me, I'll have all 9 of these centre squares finished and I'll show you how to join them. So come back then and I'll see you then. Hello again. Here I have the 9 squares all finished. The ends are all very neatly sewn in on the back, and remember that what is classed as the back is that. So this round was the front of the last round, but I flipped it after I did the last round, and what we're looking at now is what will be classed as the front of the blanket. And we're going to be joining with a simple join as you go stitch. I'm going to be using more than one colour to do the join, which is why it's going to be simple join as you go. If it was just the one colour, I would be doing continuous join as you go. But no, for this one we're going to be using different shades, so it's simple join as you go. So I'll just get ready and start you off on the tutorial for joining the squares. So let's start. I'm going to be doing my first square in the top right hand corner of this section of 9, and the colour that I'm going to be using for the join for this one is Parma Violet, the Stylecraft Special Parma Violet. Now this is very simple for this first square because all we're going to do is an extra round to go all the way round it. And using the Parma Violet, the square has got the wrong side showing for the last round, and the only difference to the previous rounds is that this one is going to be done in half treble as opposed to treble stitch. So I will take my yarn and just start in any corner. just a bit too close to the camera, I think. So I'm going to just plonk myself back down on the chair. I've attached my yarn and I've put in 2 chains to correspond as being the first half treble stitch. Now I use 2 chains for half treble and treble as the first stitch, and that's me got that ready in place. And then I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to put my hook into that corner, pull up the loop, yarn over, and pull through all the 3 loops on the hook. And that's a half treble stitch. It just makes a slightly smaller stitch than the treble, and I like that for joining. It keeps it neater, I feel. So I've done my 2 chains and 2 half trebles, and that's the first half of this corner. And then I'm just going to go round the rest of this square with 3 half trebles in each of the spaces. That's one group, and look for the next space between the clusters, and 3 half trebles. And we've got one more space, so there are actually 3 spaces between each of the corners on this round. And then the corner is just done the same way as the previous rounds. It's 3, find the space, yeah, 3 half trebles, chain 2 and 3 half trebles. Chain 2 and 3 half trebles. Now I'm going to work on around this square and finish it off, and then I'll come back when I'm ready to do the important part, which is starting to attach the next square to it. So I'll see you back at that point. This is the square with the half treble stitch all the way around now, and you can see how neat and corner that half treble makes. I really like that. It's a lovely square if you like. So I'm going to put that back down in my top right hand corner, and the next one that I'm going to work on is the middle along the top row, and the colour that I'm going to use for that is the soft peach, the very pale pink from the Stylecraft range. And I'm going to start it in exactly the same way as the other square, but this time I'm only going to do the first side. Now it doesn't matter, you don't have to start in this corner and try and work against yourself. You can just pick it up and work it along one edge until you get to the other side. So I'll quickly do that just now. In fact, what I'll do is I'll lay it down here, hopefully we can see it. So I'm just attaching my yarn, chaining 2 as usual, and my half trebles going in, 2 half trebles, let's pull that through. I'm just going to move slightly because what's happening is I'm having to look through my camera and it's difficult to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop down here and hopefully both you and I can see what we're doing. So I've done my I've done one of the half trebles in that corner, so I've got the second one to do, and then I'm coming along and putting as normal my 3 half trebles in each space, and I'm going to just go along as far as the next corner. So that's 3 half trebles, 3 half trebles. And when I get to the corner, I'm going to put in 3 half trebles, but then I'm going to stop at that point. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we've got one edge, but only half of the corner done. Now I'm going to swing this round so that it is lying with this edge that we've just worked along the bottom, and the hook is right next to the corner of the first square. At this point, instead of working up this side of my second square, I'm going to find the corner of that first square and do a slip stitch. So I'm just going to, I've pushed my hook into that corner, and all I need to do is pull the loop through so that I've got 2 loops on my hook, and then pull that through again. And what that has done is put the first stitch to attach these 2 squares to each other. Now normally, as I say, I would, when I'm doing a corner, I would put 3 half trebles, chain 2 and 3 half trebles. This slip stitch replaces the 2 chains, and I don't put any other chains into this corner. I'm just going to now continue on this side and finish the corner. Oops, I had to pause the video there to have a sneeze, sorry about that. So I've finished that corner with the 3 half trebles in it. And now before I go up to put my 3 half trebles in this next space, which is here, I'm going to go up to the next space on the first square, which is here, and I'm going to put another slip stitch in. So into that space, pull through the yarn, 2 loops on the hook, and pull through. And that's our second anchoring stitch. Then yarn over, and it's time to go into this space here, and we're going to put in 3 half trebles. So all we're really doing is working around this second square in exactly the same way as we did the first one, but in between each of these clusters of half treble stitches, we're going into the first square and putting a slip stitch. So into the next group of half treble, into the next space for the group of half trebles, and then again we've got another space coming up on the first square, so a slip stitch, and we continue up to the corner into the next one, 3 half trebles, and slip stitch, and that's the last space on both the second square and the first square before the corner. So the next thing we need to do is into the corner of the second square and do the first 3 half trebles, and again, instead of putting in 2 chains and doing the other 3, what I'm going to do is find the corner of the first square and put in my slip stitch, and then I can complete this corner with the 3 half trebles. And I'll stop at that, well, I'll pause long enough to let you see what it looks like. So there we have the first edge that we did on its own, and then this edge that we worked up, and you can see if I pull it apart that there are slip stitches between each of the clusters and in each of the corners. Now all I need to do is to just work as normal along this side and back down and finish off my yarn. So I'll see you when I'm ready to start adding the third square. I've worked round almost all four sides now. Just want to mention that when you do this corner, which is the third corner of that second square, there's nothing, you're not joining it to anything at this point, so you would just do that one as normal, where it would be 3 half trebles, 2 chains, 3 half trebles. And the same thing applies to the very first corner where you started, and this is where we're going to finish this round. So it's into this very first corner with 3 half trebles, and then 2 chains to form the corner, and then we can fasten off. So I'm just going to make my 2 chains and then into the top of the first chain 2 and pull through and fasten off. So now we have 2 squares joined to each other. Now I flipped this round when I was working that last side, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a stitch marker and I'm going to pop that stitch marker into the centre of this square somewhere, and that is going to have 2 purposes. One is it will remind me that this is the front of the blanket. When we're doing the whole blanket, it sometimes becomes a bit confusing which side is front and which is back. So if you always look for that stitch marker, you'll know that's the front of the blanket. And every time we do a join at any point in the blanket, it's always done on the front. So that's a good guide to follow. The other thing is that putting it in there will always remind you that this is the top right hand corner of this group of 9, because you know, you can lose your place, especially if you stop for a break for any point and come back to it. It's sometimes a little bit confusing to know whereabouts you are. So that's your top right hand corner. So this is my third square, and this colour I'm going to join with is mushroom. They're all very similar, soft, vintagey shades, which I really like. So again, we'll just do this. I'll just do the start of this one again, just to let you see, and then I'll work it and come back when I've got it done. So attach my yarn, and I'm going to do my first edge. So that's chain 2 and 2 half trebles in that same corner. Move this out of the way so it's clearer. And 3 half trebles along the side. Each of these spaces, there are, again, you know, you'll know by now that there are 3 spaces along each side between the corners. And start the first half of this corner, but stop at that point and turn it round and line it up. I'll move this down a little bit, and we're going to line it up with the corner of the second square. And if you'll remember, what you do now is just find that corner space and make your slip stitch. Pull this, there's an end just getting in the way, and finish off that corner with your 3 half trebles. It's really very easy, and it's the joining stitch that is my go-to as far as granny squares are concerned. And as I say, I always like to use a half treble stitch instead of a treble stitch. I mean, most patterns will probably tell you to use a treble stitch. Let's mention the US terms very briefly. Treble stitch is double crochet in US terms, half treble is half double crochet. But I always like to use the half treble stitch because, as I say, it keeps the join a little smaller and neater, and it also gives me nice crisp corners. As you can see there, that's a nice straight corner. So I'm coming up this side, and of course you'll know by now what I do. I just go round the corner and slip stitch into it and then finish off the square. So last slip stitch on the second square, and I'm into the corner of the third square, and slip stitch into the corner of the second square, no extra chains in that, and just finish off that corner with 3 half trebles. There we go, and you can see that's the third square attached, and you can see the definition by using the 3 different colours for joining. There is a nice definition of the squares, which I quite like. So I'll finish this one off and I'll come back when it's time to start the middle row of this section. Onto the middle section now, and you can see that I have used the soft peach and I've done my single edge of the right hand square in the middle section. Now this was the way I did this first joining square in the top section, and if I do that with this one, there's nowhere to join, so we need to flip it round, and you've got your corner. If I push this back into vision a wee bit, we've worked up here, and this is us ready to join along here, and it's exactly the same way, but this time there's just something slightly different because we have 2 corners to work in this section here. So I'm going to slip stitch into this corner. In fact, I'll just do it quickly and let you see. So I'm going to slip stitch into this corner and then finish off my corner with the half trebles, 3 half trebles, just as usual. And I think this is the only thing that can flummox some people when they're doing the join as you go. They get the grasp of the actual stitch, but it's just which direction you're working in to make the actual joins. Because we're coming along this part here, and 3 half trebles and a slip stitch in between the groups of trebles. I'll take that back. And then slip stitch and slip stitch. Right, so now we've come to the corner of this square, and as usual we'll put our 3 half trebles into that corner. 1, 2, 3. But this time, instead of slip stitching into the corner of the lilac colour, I'm actually going to leave that empty, and I'm going to find the corner of this square here. So it's diagonally across from this corner, and I'm going to make my slip stitch in there and then finish this corner off as usual. Now what that means is that this is all nicely joined along the top here, and it's joined to this corner here, but this corner needs to have, it's still a little bit open, but that will be joined when we put this square in, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now I'm going to continue along here, along to the bottom and finish off, and then I'll start this middle square and show you what happens with that corner. This is the center square, and I've done my first edge of that, and it's let me see, it's the bottom edge, because once you've done your first round, you can just fiddle it around to see where it's going to actually meet up with an open corner on the previous square. So this was along the bottom, and then of course slip stitched, 3 half trebles, slip stitch all the way up this side. We've also got 2 sides to do that on this time. So I've stopped at this point to show you what I do with the corner. So I've done my 3 half trebles in this corner stitch, and I'm going to diagonally go over to the very first square to make my slip stitch like that, and then I can finish the corner. So that makes a kind of a cross over the corners of the squares, and that holds it nice and firmly. So 3 half trebles, and as I say, we've got 2 sides to join, so I'm going into this space to make my slip stitch, and then 3 half trebles, and that's the way you would just continue along that edge. Slip stitch, and I'll just work my way around. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to treat this corner here the same way I did this one. So when I've worked along and I've put my 3 half trebles into this corner, I'm going to go diagonally over to this square, the corner of this square, to put my slip stitch. Leave that one alone just now, and leave that one alone just now, and then come down this side and finish off this corner with my 3 half trebles and chain 2 and fasten off. So I will continue around there, finish that one off, and then I'll start this one, and I'll take you up to this corner again, just to remind you of what happens in there, and then I'll finish that off. And really that's all you need to do. So what I'll do is I'll come back once I've got the next round, which is the bottom row of squares, done, and I'll show you what the finished result looks like. Just popping on to remind you that when you come up to this corner where we've got all the other squares already in, we're going diagonally across to the center square to make the slip stitch, and then continuing with the corner. And hey, this is the 9 squares all joined and all looking nice and neat despite these ends, which we'll sort out in a minute. Quick recap for the last round. It started, I did my first side of the last square of the bottom right hand side square, joined it along the top of it to the square above, did my diagonal slip stitch and came down and finished off, and then started, sorry, that was a break in the, then started the second one, came along, joined diagonally across with the slip stitch along here, diagonally across with the slip stitch and finished off, and then the final one, same idea, diagonally, and then just straight up, because we're straight up into the corner because we're at an outside edge, so there's no diagonal to work into. And then always remember that when you come down to an open corner, it's 3 half trebles, 2 chains and 3 half trebles. So now all I need to do for this section is to finish off these ends, and please don't leave them until later on in the blanket. It's much better to tackle them as you go along. So I'm going to pull all these ends through to the back. Remember, my stitch marker is there, so I know this is the front of the blanket. So I'm going to take all these ends and make sure that they all go through to the back so that I can sew them in nice and invisibly. And then I will bring the next section to video, and I'll show you how we start the next part, section 2 of the blanket. So by the time you come back, all these ends will have gone and everything will be looking hunky-dory. Bye for now.